Today on the Carolina Storyteller, I'm joined with Kevin from the Midnight Terrors podcast. And we're going to be talking about one of the most documented hauntings ever. Stay tuned. This is the Carolina Storyteller.
In the dark woods where shadows creep, stories rise as the campfire reaps. Jonathan's voice a haunting thrill. With every tale he bends on will. Echoes whisper, the night draws near. By the firelight our fears collide. The Carolina Storyteller, our guide. Through the spooky, the feathering fight. Fables of darkness igniting the night of the night.
Welcome to the Carolina Storyteller, folks. I am your storyteller, Jonathan Phoenix. Joining me today is the amazing, the awesome, the epic Kevin Roche from Midnight Terrors podcast. Kevin, say hi to everybody.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the gracious introduction, Jonathan. You sure you're talking about me? Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm talking about you. For those of you who don't know, the Midnight Terrors podcast covers horror movies and movie-ish. I mean, they're Midnight Terrors. And it's a great show and one that I have had the honor of showing up and working alongside for the past year now. And Kevin is also an established musician. He's out performing. And he is the director of the Young Frankenstein Shadowcast that is going to debut here at Atomacon today at 4 p.m. You excited about that?
Absolutely. It's been about 6 months of hard work on that show, so everybody should come see it. It's going to be fun.
I agree. The show's going to be fun. I have an in with one of the actors. He plays Igor, and I'm telling you, he's just exceptionally funny. Igor is going to be one of the funniest actors out there. And if you're missing the show, you're missing out. But we're not going to talk about all that today. We're going to talk about a haunting that occurred in London in the 1970s and became particularly famous because of how documented this haunting was and how scandalous it was by the end when certain things were uncovered, and how still today it is argued over immensely. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the Einfield Haunting. Now, I call it the Einfield Poltergeist. And the reason I call it a poltergeist is because you have to look at the situation. So you have 1970s London, and you have a single mother. She's recently been divorced. Now, this mother has 4 children, 2 preteen daughters and 2 young sons. And they're struggling. I mean, back then it was very hard for women to find work, so she's struggling. She's not having a lot of money in. Husbands ran off, left her with these 4 kids. They're not living in the best environment. And suddenly, paranormal events start happening. Now, they start off small, as they generally do. Things moving around the room, knocking sounds, kids seeing things in the night, stuff like that. It starts out generally small. And then it gets to the point to where the mother ends up having to call the police because there's evidence that there's somebody in the house. And this is where the story starts to get weird, because the police come in the house and they begin to see chairs moving on their own. They actually document these noises. This is actually documented in the police report, that there were things that happened that they could not identify. So off of that, Kevin, would you say this is a real paranormal event when the police document it?
So I did a little bit of research, coming into this, because this is part 1 of 2 for our crossover, where we'll be talking about the movie on the Midnight Terrors episode that we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's tough to say with this one. I always like to believe that what's documented actually happened. I do know that the law enforcement person in question had mentioned that they did witness a chair wobbling and moving across the floor inexplicably. So there could be some truth to it. That's usually the side I tend to err on, but it also does get muddy when you realize like how the story goes on later on.
Yes. So he's mentioning how the story goes on later on, and that's the important part. Is after this, things really start to focus on the second oldest daughter. She becomes what seems to be the focus of whatever this paranormal stuff is happening. Now, there are evidence where she is seen levitating. There's evidence where she's seen committing inhuman acts that shouldn't be able to. They said that she crawled on the walls. Um, and some of this was witnessed by professionals, some of it wasn't. There is a famous photograph of her levitating, which, when you look at the photograph, you can't tell if she's levitating or if she's actually just jumped really high and somebody snapped a picture of her jumping. And that is the argument that paranormal investigators have to this day, is that could this have all been faked? One of the big things is she started talking in another voice. And believe it or not, it was actually her and her sister both that were talking in the other voice. They would switch between the two of them. That's not something the film covers, but we'll get into the film later. The film is much more interesting than the real story. But this does draw an immense amount of paranormal investigation. I mean, it draws the who's who, including the ever famous Ed and Lorraine Warren. Now, the thing about Ed Warren is Ed Warren has never seen anything paranormal that he didn't think was a demon. Ed Warren walks into a place, sees something that goes bump and says, "That's a demon." And Ed and Lorraine were sure that it was a demon. They just couldn't figure out how it was a demon. They were having problems locating the demon. And then comes the turn. Because you have all these paranormal investigators there, and they're all watching, and they're all paying attention, and they're all actually trying to find something. The youngest daughter actually fakes an event. And this is caught on camera of her faking it. And because of that, the entire investigation is thrown into question. Everything is then thrown into question. Well, was it just her? Is it some kind of psychiatric episode? Is this really paranormal? So there's the argument that there was inexplicable documented paranormal activity that people did document. And this is things flying around the house, the chair moving, things that people actually did see and document that they can't explain. There is the girl's changing of her voice that they can't explain. But then there is so much that they can explain and evidence that kind of just destroys the whole story. And that's where it gets hokey, because then Ed and Lorraine Warren, who are there telling everybody to write a book, all of a sudden there's this, it's a sham, it's a fake. So they wash their hands of it and dip and leave the family to kind of deal with it on their own. And eventually the situation does die down. Now, here's where I want to psychoanalyze the thing. And I'm going to ask you, what do you know about poltergeists?
So, earlier on, like when I was growing up, I would watch a lot of those ghost shows, in particular, Haunting, Paranormal State, and stuff like that. So a lot of what I've heard about various spirit types come from that kind of research. And I know poltergeist has also often been referred to as like a noisy ghost. So almost more of like an irritating ghost, more so than like a "I'm going to cause you physical harm" thing. And it's also been said at some point by some of those shows that sometimes people will often imitate poltergeist activity. Like that's one of the weird effects of it. So that's another argument that happens with the daughters being caught faking some incidents. And it's important to note too that if you go on YouTube, there is a news broadcast where they actually went to the house and interviewed both the daughters, and you can hear one of the younger of the two daughters doing the supposed like creepy old man voice. Yes. And they brought in like speech people to come see how she was able to do that. So not a ton of knowledge about poltergeist, but I do know that it tends to be a rather invasive type of haunting.
Well, so here's the kicker about poltergeist is that there is a theory that poltergeist activity can actually be caused by negative emotion in the house. Okay, so and again, I love to theorize on things like this. So you have a divorced mom, 4 kids. They're all dealing with dad gone. They're dealing with these abandonment issues. They're going into their teenage years. There is a lot of emotion in there. And for these 2 teenage girls to have all that emotion and all that, it is highly possible that if this theory of poltergeist is true, that it was the negative emotion that was causing stuff to move. So maybe there was some poltergeist activity there, and then the kids were just making it worse. But then again, you have your point there is that there is the recording of her doing the voice, and there are people there that were speech experts, they're audio experts, and they're just like, there's no way that that body could create that voice. And that's the problem is that you have evidence here that is documented, that is real documented evidence that paranormal activity occurred. But you have evidence here that there was a major psychological situation going on. There were real effects happening to these children. And these children were, in fact, acting out in a way to kind of escalate the situation. And so, for all of the evidence to the positive, because we're in such a environment where paranormal stuff is usually scrutinized and dismissed, a little bit of evidence to the negative immediately erases all of that, and that's where we're at, I think. What's your opinion?
See, again, this is where it gets kind of muddled because for every like what seems to be a finite point, there's a different piece of the story that almost counteracts that, but then it's like this ever flowing back and forth, where like ventriloquists or something would come in and be like, "Oh, this is how you do that voice," but then other like medical professionals would come in and say, "Well, if she did that voice, she would have a cough that she never complained of or a soreness." So it gets really tricky here. I think that you can play the back and forth of like, is them creating the chaos themselves part of the haunting? Is that a residual effect, like you
Yes.
said, or does it just take the credit away from the rest of the haunting? I do tend to lean towards the side that I do think there was something happening there. But you depending on who you where you get your research from, you also just kind of hear that the hauntings just kind of stopped too,
Yes.
which also leads to like, well, that's kind of convenient. There's another podcast I listened to where don't know where they got it, but they said that the girls stopped talking about the haunting when they got into Greece.
Got it.
And
Agreed.
they were like, oh, they fell in love with John Travolta and started dressing like Olivia Newton-John, and then just the haunting stopped.
Yeah.
So
You're absolutely right. That's exactly what happened is that as the girls grew, the haunting stopped. And the family was able to live in that house, that same house where all these terrible events happened to them. The mother lived there until the day she died. She actually died in the same chair that the supposed ghost of Bill died in 40 years earlier. Because that chair, for some reason, you just kept the chair. I don't know. I don't get that one. But the rumor is that she died in the same chair, in the same spot, 40 years later, very happy, living in that house with her family as they grew up. So this was a very short period of time in their lives that was traumatic, but didn't last very long. And as you said, once something came in and changed the attitude of the 2 girls in particular, it all just went away. And that's the end of the story. That is the end of the Einfield haunting, is that in the end, it all just went away.
I do have one thing.
Go right ahead.
So something I just found out, and I guess this just happened like within the last year or two, is somebody actually came out and heard the recordings of the voice of the ghost, like the old man ghost that you hear talked about in the case.
Yes.
Somebody actually came out later and said that that was a relative of theirs. Like they recognized the voice and said, "Oh, he actually I recognize that voice, and yeah, he actually died of failing health."
That actually
in
came
that
out.
chair.
I thought that came out a lot.
It was definitely like post movie of that, I think,
I
because the movie was 2016, but I think it came after that.
okay. See, I thought that they had. I thought that a family member had actually identified that voice during the investigation. I thought because I know the family member identified the spirit because when they were talking about who it was, a family member said, "Yeah, Bill died in that house in that chair. That's where he died, and that was his house beforehand." So the family member confirmed that during the investigation. That's why we know that it was supposedly Bill's ghost. I didn't know that. I could have sworn they confirmed the voice back then too.
I think they did confirm who the ghost. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I think they did confirm who the ghost was, but it was then later on that a person came out and said, "Oh, that's my family member." So I think that's where like the new details came in. But they did hear about a ghost named Bill during the investigation.
So, like I said, there's a lot going on here, and contrary to the movie, most of it did not involve Ed and Lorraine Warren. Because this haunting was not in America. Ed and Lorraine Warren were asked to go. Well, they claimed they were asked to go and look at it. They may have just gone on their own accord. But Ed and Lorraine Warren's period and involvement in this investigation is actually minuscule compared to the whole story overall. But the movie we'll be talking about, it's a different story altogether. So be sure to check out the Midnight Terrors podcast when we do that. Folks, that is our story for today. Hope that you guys enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Kevin, for being here with me.
Thank you, Jonathan, for having me. If you haven't checked out Carolina Storyteller, I highly recommend it.
And if you haven't checked out the Midnight Terrors podcast, I highly recommend it. Kevin, where can they find you at?
You can find us on all socials, Midnight Terrors Podcast on Facebook, MTP Charleston on Instagram and TikTok, and we also have a Facebook group called Midnight Terrors Podcast. And we're on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and anywhere that you get your shows.
And believe me, I follow them on all of that. So you guys can go and check them out and probably see me commenting because they are awesome. And I'm so glad to have had you here with me. And I can't wait to do the show with you in just a little bit. That's it here from Atomacon. Remember, if you want to support this show, go to patreon.com/The Carolina Storyteller. You can sign up for just $1 and support the show every month, get ad-free episodes, and catch cool things like me hanging out with Kevin. Thank you guys for being here. And as always, stay spooky, my friends. We'll see you next time.
Heck yeah, man. That was awesome.